it's a very hard rain tonight. So if you hear that in the background, it's not thunderous applause. It's just really good rain coming to Hawaii, which will mean we'll have beautiful green hills tomorrow. It's a pleasure to hear Siale as well as the talk by Elise as well. And I'll try to build on both of those. And the good news is there's a lot happening in Oceania, but also at the global level that is pertinent to the Pacific. And I'll share a little bit in Hawaii about how we've tried to localize. So first and foremost, 2015 was a very important year. You know, it was the year where two important instruments really came into existence. First and foremost, the 2030 Agenda, or the Sustainable Development Goals, that was shared. And that was huge in September. And the other that was quite significant, of course, was the Paris Agreement. And what's significant about both of those is they also created a process that Siale talked about with the voluntary national review, so that we, civil society, can be part of the conversation. And I don't know if Elise feels that business is a box, definitely civil society feels like they're an afterthought box or a conversation towards the end, even after business. So the exciting thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is to really bring everyone to the table and have those conversations. And I'll share a bit on how that came about. The other important point with the Paris Agreement was the nationally determined contributions. And I'm sure Robert will get into those. But if we were meeting next month in Glasgow, many countries, the countries were supposed to produce their nationally determined contributions and share how they're meeting the adaptation and mitigation and all those important articles of the Paris Agreement. And what's significant about both of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement is that human rights are included in both of those. And that's a point that we can talk about today briefly, but I know we're short of time, and we can get into a bit later and bring those all together, as well as I know Universal Periodic Review was brought up, and we'll share about that. But all those, the UPR, the VNR, the NDC, are all processes to make sure that the voice of civil society is heard, and another way to engage to ensure equality among all. And I see in the message there, John mentioned the SDGs are very important in the Solomon Islands and for people with disabilities, and that's absolutely crucial. And the good news is that if you take the SDGs, they match up to 95% of human rights. And so we'll look at that with the Danish Institute for Human Rights and have a brief look. One of the other important points, so, and maybe a way to think about SDGs is not, oh no, it's a voluntary national review and what do I have to do? But more of what really are our priorities in the Pacific. What do we care about? What do we really want to focus on? Especially as Patrick brought up, it's called Build Back Better. And what we decided to frame as that was the B5, Build Back Better in beauty and in balance. So that it actually doesn't just go back to business as usual, that we actually learn some of the lessons from the COVID crisis, but also the looming climate crisis, and figure out how we'll move forward together. And so the other important element that's really crucial is the big difference from the Millennium Development Goals. The MDGs were really to cut everything in half. What they really decided, and what was significant by civil society negotiating from the 2012 Earth Summit until the September adoption in 2015, was that we would end poverty. We would ensure zero hunger. It was to go all in. It also was very important, leave no one behind, that Patrick mentioned that. Leave no one behind is absolutely crucial, especially if disability rights people feel they're being excluded and other voices aren't being included. And the other one is furthest behind first. That means you don't get to cherry pick and do the quick, easy one of we're really close so we can do that, but to make sure that the people who have been excluded in the past are at the forefront of the policymaking and figure out how we can move forward. One thing I would like to share, if that's okay, I think if I can share my screen, let's see. Oh, good, I can. So I'll share with you one exercise we did in Hawaii, and then you can share with me if it's beneficial at all. So Siale did a great job at sharing the SDGs. And those were great logos and we loved them as well in Hawaii, but we decide to localize them and indigenize them. So I'm going to share with you the localized version first. So you can see the no poverty one, we kept the numbers, we kept the colors, but in this one we added the little lays as well as some flowers in the hair. So that's the no poverty, but it's looking at everyone. And that of course is important if we look at the Pacific, because in Hawaii, we had the Ahupua'a system from the ridge to the reef, and there was no poverty. There was also no hunger because everything was always shared. And so there for Zero Hunger, we have the community association boxes. Those are the ones you can order, and you have all the beautiful food grown in Hawaii. Number 3 is good health and well-being. If we're feeling good, we have the shaka, and that's Diamond Head right there, which is now just covered in rain. He had a little cloud on him before I came in. Quality education. With this one, you can see the stars using the North Star and using voyaging, as that's really important. But we also have a little book just to be good. Gender equality, we have the kava bowl, but we have both people sharing. 6, we have clean water. We have the vessels that contain and collect water. We have a lot of those here in Hawaii when it rains like this, so we don't waste the water. We're able to have those. 7 is affordable and renewable energy. You can see there what the Pacific is really rich at. We have sun, we have waves, and we have wind. So it's looking at that. And if you look at those first 7, one way to think of them as we talk about human rights is those are really economic, social, and cultural rights. And then these next 4 are really fair economy, which I'm really glad that Alicia was talking about small and medium. And it's really fair economy. And you can see that with number 8, decent work and economic growth. There you can see sort of the fair trade with a TAPA design added to it. 9 is industry, innovation, infrastructure. Those are our first electric buses we have in Hawaii. Those are called the bus. And number 10 is, it's one of the amazing queens of Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani. And she was always focusing on reducing inequalities among all people and actually helped create the Red Cross of Hawaii. And number 11 is sustainable cities and communities. That's 2 sides there. So Silly, you'll be happy, Alisi. That's the Aloha Tower, which was the highest business building in Hawaii before everything started getting bigger. And also the state legislature. So it shows that business, public, private are working together. And we always actually do that. In Hawaii, we did the first ever voluntary local review. And it was public-private partnerships with all 4 mayors, all 4 islands, and also working with businesses. And we have some cool new business ideas I can share with you. And number 12 is responsible consumption and production. And that's the one you can see, that's the lei we make with tea leaves with your toes. If everybody else does those too, where the islands you're at. And so that's just the lei showing the cyclical relationship and how we all work together. 13 is the hokulea. And I don't know if many of you got to see hokulea when she came around Oceania, but she went around the entire world 5 years ago. And she's gonna do another voyage coming up just to the Pacific. Number 14 is, that's our indigenous fish, the humuhumu nuku nuku a pua'a. That's our state fish with some coral without the bleaching. 15 is life on land. So that's Mauna Kea. And that's the campaign people have been organizing. Then it's peace, justice, and then the kalo plant or the taro for partnerships that we all work together. And then we designed this logo for ourselves as a way to put Hawaii as a center. And then I'll show you just briefly, but not go through all of the logos. I'll show you the, let me see, I'll share screen one more time. And then if you look at the next one that we have there, that's where we actually indigenize the logos. So there we went just full Hawaii. Just some of them you can see. 2 is the ahupua'a. You can see the fish ponds that we used to be able to bring all the food from. And that's Aina Momona in Olelo, Hawaii. You can see Kulia I Ka Vai Vai. That is the knowledge one. And we've translated all of them into Olelo, Hawaii, into the Hawaiian language. And we'll share those as well. If you look at these, there's exciting ones about gender equality being the mo'o, going back to Hawaiian cosmology. Number 7 is Maui. The course, most people know about Maui just from the Disney film, but we know about Maui before, about how we harness the sun. Number 8 is the poi pounder, and making the pa'ai, the taro, which is the staple food. Number 10 is an old law in Hawaii called the Splintered Paddle, where it goes back to Kamehameha I, where everyone's allowed to go between places and not be harmed. And number 11 is Iolani Palace. And Iolani Palace had electricity even before the White House. So these sustainable development goals for Hawaii, for many of us, these are nothing new. In fact, it's the West catching up with the Pacific, because the Pacific has always been sustainable. And that builds on the great lecture by Surya last week, because Surya was saying, don't think of yourselves as not being developed. In fact, you're developed because you balanced with your culture and your cosmology, your worldview, what was needed so people had everything they needed, but also without destroying the planet for future generations. So many indigenous peoples and many Pacific Islanders were already practicing these sustainable development goals. It's just the world's finally catching up with us in 2015. And so I could go through the rest of them as well, but no point in spending too much more time. But I just wanted to share with you, that was one idea of what we did in Hawaii to localize and indigenize those global logos, but to mean something more to us here in Hawaii. The other important aspect that we can definitely look at is the Sustainable Development Goals and human rights. And the 2030 Agenda is grounded in international human rights norms and sustainable development goals. And the SDGs seek to realize human rights for all and to make sure that it's inclusive. And one of the exciting things is it shows how they mutually reinforce one another. And it's a little bit what Siale was talking about with the UPR, but to link up not only the 17 goals, but the 169 targets and the 229 indicators. All those really do focus on human rights. And there's more that I could talk about, but since we have such a short time, I'm just going to show a short video that was SDGs and human rights that the Danish Center made. That's just under 2 minutes. And we could get into it more deeply later on and reinforce it next week.
Welcome to the Danish Institute for Human Rights exhibition space. The Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, have an unprecedented potential to transform the lives of billions of people around the world. Our analysis shows that more than 90% of the SDG targets are directly linked to human rights norms and standards, which are legally binding on states. By combining efforts on implementing the SDGs and human rights, governments can save resources and ensure a coherent and efficient basis to deliver on their international commitments. To help governments, civil society, business, and all stakeholders integrate human rights and SDGs in their work, we have developed 2 key tools: the Human Rights Guide to the Sustainable Development Goals, where you can easily see which human rights standards underpin each SDG target, and the SDG Human Rights Data Explorer, which helps you to quickly see which recommendations from the human rights system relate to which SDG target. The Danish Institute for Human Rights has also developed a number of other tools and analysis with a human rights-based approach to the SDGs. These include an inspirational database for companies on how to work efficiently with human rights due diligence and thereby contribute to the realization of the SDGs, a guide on a human rights-based approach to the financial aspects of the means of implementation of the SDGs, and an analysis on a human rights-based approach to leaving no one behind in the age of 2019 and beyond. We hope that you will enjoy our exhibition space. We will find more tools, trainings, and guidance to efficiently align human rights and SDGs in your work.
So it's just a short one, but to kind of build after I heard what Siale went through, and then
welcome to
as well as the other presenters. So I just wanted to show what was possible and what was also happening, and to see how it's another way to link all of our issues together, and that the VNRs won't happen every year. The UPR won't happen every year, but there might also be a treaty body review, or the NDCs will be turned in. And it's to be persistent and patient, but also make sure we're passionate about making sure that human rights is included. And of course, there might be an important forum on business and human rights, like that's happening in early December for the Pacific, or also at the big annual forum on business and human rights in Geneva. So there's a lot of places that we can bring these SDGs and apply them. And the important thing is to really think about what are our priorities first and foremost in our communities, and how can we utilize the UN processes to definitely put forward the priorities of the people in the Pacific. And so those are some of the points that I just wanted to raise. And I'll stop there, Patrick, if that sounds good. So we are still on time. And then I know Robert's after me, and then we'll still make sure we cover other aspects later, but I just wanted to get us caught back to where we should be.
Thank you very much.